The role of a case officer is very, very simple. It's to recruit spies to steal secrets, period. Now, I have a personality where I can manipulate people like that. I can turn it on and off.
When you create that relationship with an asset, is it real or is it fake?
We recruited this guy, and he's actually a double agent for one of our greatest enemies in the world. Then I get a call from my buddy, and he says, they just gave him orders to kill you in the next meeting. So he triggers a meeting. He said, I'm here. I said, come up to the 8th floor. It was the top floor. And I said, let's go up to the roof. He goes, I don't think I want to go up to the roof. And I said, why? You think I'm going to throw you off the roof?
All right. John Kiriakou, welcome, man.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's a real pleasure. It's good to see you.
Thanks. Good to see you too. It's been a while.
Yeah, it has, and I'm glad you're here. So John, for people that may not be familiar with your story, you spent 15 years in the CIA as an analyst, as a case officer or a spy, and later as CIA's chief of counterterrorism in Pakistan, where you led the raid that captured the infamous Abu Zubaydah. And later, after your CIA career, you blew the whistle on the U.S.'s enhanced interrogation program, or the torture program. And you went to prison for just short of 2 years in connection with that. So, man, I was telling you downstairs, you, like I said, you have a fascinating story, but I feel like you've lived several lives in one. And I can't wait to dig into it. So thanks for coming up.
I'm very happy to do it.
Yeah. And here, I got you just as a little thank you for making the drive.
Jeez, thank you.
A couple things if you want to
Oh, that's so kind of you. Thanks. You didn't
man.
have to do that. Oh, wow. Hey. All right.
It's a level 1 disguise right there, right?
Thank you.
There's a couple other things in there too.
Oh, thank you, man. Oh, yeah. Wow. Don't tell me you went all the way to Astoria, Queens to get this stuff.
There's a Greek store around the corner in Kenilworth, New Jersey.
Oh my gosh.
A couple minutes. I asked a Greek buddy. I said, "Hey, I got a friend coming over. What are a couple things?" And there's one more thing in there that you'll get a laugh out of.
Oh, awesome. Oh, I didn't see it. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. We should talk about that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
For
Thank
people
you
listening,
very, very much.
absolutely, man. For people listening, it's a mug that says "Go home and get your fucking shine box." So I know you love Goodfellas.
Yeah. If there's one thing I learned, and I promise I won't get ahead of us. It's whenever the Italians say, "You believe this fucking guy," you're in trouble. That's going to be a problem. Yeah, you don't ever want them to say that about you. You believe this fucking guy.
Yeah. Yeah.
Man, thank you so much for this.
Absolutely.
Oh,
man.
yeah,
Absolutely.
I'll wear this every day.
Yeah. So again, I appreciate you making the drive up, and
Thank you.
I've been excited for this for a while. So
thank you.
Yeah, we'll keep it in chronological order.
Uh-huh.
So let's start at your childhood. Where'd you grow up?
Right. I grew up in a little town in Western Pennsylvania called Newcastle, Pennsylvania. Wonderful place to grow up. It's about an hour north of Pittsburgh in Amish country. And it's not such a nice place anymore. You know, when DEA and ATF open a field office in your hometown of 18,000 people, you got a problem. But it was great when I was growing up. We had 50,000 people back then. You know, there was stuff to do, places to go. But it was just a nice, peaceful, fun, town, small town America. My parents were public school teachers. My dad was an elementary school principal. I have a brother and a sister, and had kind of an idyllic childhood. I'm the oldest of 3.
Mm.
Yeah.
What kind of stuff did you like to do as a kid?
I was nuts for baseball. Almost as nuts for football, but I liked exploring a lot. There were some really big cemeteries near our house, and I used to go down there and hunt for salamanders under rocks and stuff. And I got to the point where I'd go down there and it wasn't really the salamanders anymore that I was looking for. It was just, interesting people. You look for names that you recognize, the founders of the town, and the name on the steel mill, and the name on the coal mine, and the name on the hospital. And stuff like that.
Mm.
And then every once in a while, we'd get to go to the big city, Pittsburgh. My dad would take us to a Pirates game or a Steelers game. And that was always a big deal because it really was a big city. They had a zoo, they had a museum, and I kind of got the travel bug. One of the things that was the most important to me, though, growing up was this makes me sound like such a nerd, but with shortwave radio. When I was 9 years old, my dad took me to an auction and he bid 50 cents on a box of junk. I still remember it. And so he got the box for 50 cents and it had a broken shortwave radio in it. And so he was able to fix it and he gave it to me. And I turned it on one night. You can get the signals once the sun goes down. And I got the BBC in London, I got Radio Moscow in Russia, or the Soviet Union back then, and just stuff from all over the world, Cuba and Ecuador and China and all different kinds of places. And I was hooked. Hooked. It got to the point where, well, that was when I was 9. By the time I was 14, my dad had constructed a 40-foot tower with a shortwave antenna on the top of it and ran the wires into my bedroom. I had saved and saved and saved my paper route money, and I bought a $1,000 shortwave base unit. I mean, $1,000 in 1978. It was a lot of money. It was like buying a car, And yeah, I was able to listen to. I'd get up at 3, 4 o'clock in the morning, just hoping that the atmospheric conditions were perfect, that I could get that station in Mongolia that I actually was able to with Radio Mongolia. And yeah, I was hooked, but it gave me the travel bug. And so I knew early on I was going to leave Newcastle, Pennsylvania. I wasn't going to go back. I wanted to live overseas. I wanted to go to school in Washington because that's where the action was. And I was able to do all of it.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So you went to GW.
Went to GW. It was the only school I applied to. It was 2 blocks from the White House. And it was one of only 3 schools in the country at the time that had a degree program in Middle Eastern studies. When I was 15, the Iranian government collapsed and Iranian students took American diplomats hostage. And so I was fascinated by this thing. We're on the brink of war with Iran, and I was coming up to draft age. So they reinstituted draft registration, not the draft, but you had to register. I think you still do. So I was interested. And so when I went to GW, I majored in Middle Eastern studies and, studied Islam, which was it was the focus of my major, Islamic theology, studied Arabic, studied oil and oil economics. And then, the rest the path presented itself, I guess is the best way I could say it.
Yeah, it did. And so how did you end up getting into the agency?
Well, when I finished undergrad, I just kind of felt in my heart like I wasn't adult enough to start my life. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I felt like I needed to go to grad school because I just wasn't ready to go out there. And so I stayed at GW and I was working on a master's degree in legislative affairs with a focus on foreign policy analysis. And so I was taking this class called The Psychology of Leadership with an eminent psychiatrist by the name of Dr. Gerald Post. Post was very unusual in that he called himself a political psychiatrist. He had a PhD in political science, a PhD in psychology, and an MD. And so he was teaching this class. And the reason why this class was so interesting, The Psychology of Leadership, is that it tried to look at how governments manipulate other world leaders into doing what they want them to do. For example, of course, you've heard of the Yalta Conference near the end of World War II. So Dr. Post asked us, and I remember this all these years later. I mean, this was 38 years ago, 36 years ago, whatever it is. Dr. Post asked us, Why was that conference held in Yalta, of all places? Nobody had any idea. And he said the answer was actually quite simple. Because Stalin knew that Roosevelt was sick, right? His spies in the United States had said, something's wrong with Roosevelt. He's ill. He looks like he's dying. So rather than have the conference in Cuba or Iran, which is where it was supposed to be originally, it was supposed to be in Tehran, it was in Yalta because Stalin insisted that it be held there. And Roosevelt had to fly all the way around the war. So he had to go from Washington to Morocco to sub-Saharan Africa, to Tehran, and then north to Yalta. It took days. By the time he got to Russia, he was exhausted and sick. And all he wanted to do was go to sleep. But Stalin insisted that they begin the talks immediately. So just to be able to get to bed, Roosevelt gave up Poland. And so for the next 45 years, Poland was communist. It didn't have to be, but Roosevelt was exhausted and he needed to sleep. He said, that is how you manipulate somebody's psychology. So toward the end of this class, the professor gave us an assignment where we had to shadow our bosses for a week and then write a psychological analysis of our bosses. I was working for a guy at the United Food and Commercial Workers Union at their international headquarters in Washington. And I was a little bit afraid of this guy. He was a mean, tough, old school union organizer, right? He had had his back broken by scabs in some strike in the 70s in New York. He was working for the International Ladies Garment Workers Union. And he was just a mean old union guy. So I'm shadowing him, following him, watching what he does. I mean, I knew all of it anyway because I worked for him normally. But this week we were joined at the hip. And halfway through the week on Wednesday, we got into an argument and I called him a racist, which he was. He was so angry. His face got all red. He clenches his teeth and he balls up his fists, right? And I thought to myself, I went too far. And I put up my hands to protect myself because I thought, here it comes. And he's going to knock me out. This is how strong and tough he was. I put up my hands and he goes, my penis is bigger than yours. And I said, what? And he goes, my penis is bigger than yours. And I said, you know what? You're nuts. And I quit. And I walked out and I quit.
That is not what I was expecting to hear.
So I went back to my dorm. I was an RA in the dorm, which is one of the ways I was paying my way through college. And I wrote my psychological evaluation. And I said, he's a sociopath with psychopathic and possibly violent tendencies. And I did all these examples culminating in what had just happened. So I pass in the paper. A week later, I get it back. I have an A. He puts an A in the top. And then in the margin underneath the A, he wrote, please see me after class.
This is Dr. Post.
Dr. Post. Please see me after class. So after class, I went up to him and I said, Dr. Post, you wanted to see me? He said, yeah, come down to my office. The office was in the same building. The class was in what's called the Gelman Library, but they have classrooms at the top floor and then little teeny tiny professor's offices. You know how professor's offices are. So on the lower floors, they have the professor's offices. I go down to his office and he closes the door and he says, listen, I'm not really a professor here. I'm a CIA officer undercover as a professor here. And I'm here to find people who would fit into the CIA's culture. I think you would fit into the CIA's culture. Would you like to join the CIA? The truth is, I had played with the idea a couple of times over the years, but I had never given it serious thought. But I was getting married in 6 weeks, and I didn't have any job. I didn't have any hope for a job, and I didn't know what I was going to do. So I said, sure, Why not? So he picked up the phone and he called a number. And I'll tell you, I remember being very impressed as he was doing this because those are the days where people had Rolodexes. Do you know what a Rolodex is? Yeah. So you used
I'm
to,
not that young, unfortunately.
right?
So.
You used to write somebody's name and phone number on a little card, and the card fit into a wheel, and you would roll the wheel and look up the number. And as he was going through the Rolodex, I saw one of the cards said Oliver North, home. And I was like, Oliver North? Oliver North had just been acquitted of a whole bunch of crimes for engineering the arms for hostages sale to Iran. This was a major national scandal. And I was like, wow, he knows Oliver North? Turned out he worked very, very closely with Oliver North. So anyway, he calls this number and he says, Bob, it's Jerry. I've got a good one for you. Do you have a few minutes? And then he hung up the phone and he says, go to this address and ask for Bob. And he hands me the address. Well, the address was one subway stop away in Roslyn, Virginia. So I get on the subway. I go there. I'm there in 15 minutes. And I go to the address, and it's this, normal office tower that Roslyn's famous for. And I go up to whatever it was. I think it was the 6th floor. And there's no name on the door, nothing. It's just a door. So I knock on the door. And this guy opens the door just a crack. And he says, are you here for Bob? And I said, yes. So he lets me in. And it's a little 6 by 6 foot atrium. But the second door has a big spin dial lock on it, like a bank, right? So he does the dial. And there's a woman on the other side. And she said, are you here for Bob? And I said, I am. So she lets me in. And I'm sitting there. And then Bob comes out. I still, to this day, I have no idea if his name really was Bob.
Yeah.
And that's the only name I ever knew him by. But he was like a 6'6", 320-pound, loud, smiling, good old guy. John, I'm Bob. How the hell are you? And he shakes my hand. Come on in. So he says, Jerry says you're a good guy. I said, well, I appreciate it. I said, he's an amazing professor. He's a great guy. And he says, John, let me ask you something. Have you ever betrayed a friendship? And I was like, oh, I don't think so. I hope not. He said, okay, that's okay. Listen, I want you to do a couple of things for me. He says, I want you to go to this address. There are going to be some people there waiting for you. And I said, like right now? And he says, yeah, right now. I said, okay. He said, then I want you to call me, or better yet, I'll call you. I said, okay. So I go home, I get in my car, I drive out to this equally nondescript building in Vienna, Virginia. 1-story flat building that you would drive past 1,000 times, you would never notice it. So I ring the bell. This guy lets me in. You, John? And I said, yeah, come on in. So I go there, and there's a table with 3 chairs on one side and 1 chair on the other. And in the 3 chairs are 3 people who never identified themselves by name, but they identified themselves as being a psychologist, a psychiatrist, and an anthropologist. So I sit down. No hello, how are you? Nothing. I just sit down. I said hello. They all just kind of looked at me. And then one of them says, describe your relationship with your mother. And I go, oh. I said, yeah, my mom and I are close. She's a school teacher, and, she's a terrific mother and very nurturing and, took good care of all 3 of us. And, well, what do you say? And then they're like, okay, describe your relationship with your father. So I did. I said, my dad's a good guy. He's kind of introverted. My mom was the extrovert of the family. Was your father the disciplinarian? And I said, no, actually. My dad's a big, strong guy, and I think he was probably always afraid he would hurt us or something. So no, my dad's a very gentle soul. Then they asked me that question again. Have you ever betrayed a friendship? And I said, I don't think so. Let me think about it for a second. And then the anthropologist says, no, that's the answer we were looking for. And then one of them says, you're going to need to go into the next room and you need to give us some piss, some blood, and some hair. I go, okay. So I went and gave him some piss, some blood, and some hair. And then I left. I went home. I called my fiance. She goes, how did it go? I said, I have no idea. They asked me these 3 weird questions. It took 15 minutes. Then they took my pee, my blood, and pulled some of my hairs out. I get a call like 4 weeks later from Bob. He goes, you blew the doors off that meeting. I go, Bob, it was like from Bizarro World. I didn't understand what they wanted. They wouldn't explain anything. He said, you aced it. He said, now we want you to go to headquarters. You're going to have a meeting at headquarters. So I said, okay. So I go to CIA headquarters and I went to like 4 different offices. They asked me 1,000 million questions and I leave. By then I've gotten married. I go home. She's like, how did it go? I said, I don't have any idea. There's no feedback. There's no reaction from anybody. There's no response. Nothing. Then Bob calls. He goes, you aced it, man. You aced it. I go, Bob, there's no feedback. He goes, no, you don't need any feedback. He said, they want you in your raw state. I said, okay, so what next? He goes, look, they're going to give you a polygraph exam, and if you pass it, you're in. I was a nervous friggin' wreck about the polygraph. I had never taken a polygraph exam. So they scheduled the polygraph, and I was very fortunate in that first polygraph because I had a very respectful, young African-American woman. And so she hooks me up. And it's funny. They put a cuff on you like they're taking your blood pressure. And then they put these electrodes on your fingertips. Then they put a belt around you to measure your breathing. Then they put electrodes on your ankle. And there was one other that they did. Like, was it on my temple? I don't remember anymore. So you have to sit there like this and you can't move. You just have to be as still as possible. And you have to answer all the questions, yes or no, because the thing doesn't detect anything else. It just detects bodily reactions, increases in your heart rate or respiration, sweating. It's very, very sensitive to sweating. So I called Dr. Post in advance and I said, listen, any advice you could give me, I would really, really appreciate this because I've gotten so far in the process. I really want this to happen. So he said, I can't really give you any insider tips. He said, but I'll tell you something as a psychologist or as a psychiatrist. He said, you're going to be in a room that has nothing on the walls. It's just a white room with a window. And of course, they're going to be looking at you from the other side of the window as the polygrapher is doing the exam. He said, there's bound to be a speck on the wall. He said, focus on the speck. Think about nothing but the speck. He said, now they're going to ask you some very disturbing questions, questions that may make you upset. He said, just answer the question yes or no. Don't think about it. If they say, have you ever killed anybody? Say no. Don't think about what it might feel like to kill somebody. Just say no and focus on the speck. I sit down in the thing. She wires me up, and it takes a good 20 minutes to wire you up to this polygraph machine. And I sit there, and as soon as I sit and I'm wired up, I look, and sure enough, there's a speck like straight ahead of me. So I'm looking at the speck. And they start asking you questions. Have you ever committed a violent felony? No. Have you ever used a weapon in a crime? No. And then they get, into more mundane things. Are you financially responsible? Yes. Have you ever shoplifted anything? No. Have you ever taken anything from the office worth more than $20? No. Have you ever had sex with a man? And she just threw that one at me like a grenade. So I go, no, which was true. But I could feel my heart going like this, like she's trying to trip me up. And she says, let's take a little break. You're sweating profusely. I can tell that you're nervous. I said, yeah, you kind of threw that question out there like a grenade into the middle of the room. She said, it's a standard question. I said, I understand. So I just kind of sat there for a couple of minutes and got my heart rate to slow down. And then she said, I'll be honest with you, you are reacting to one of the questions. Which was bullshit. I was not reacting to one of the questions. But I came to learn later in my career that this is a turd that they throw at you to see how you respond to it. I said, okay. And so she says, I'm gonna consult with my boss, and then I'm gonna come in and we're gonna go back over the question that you're reacting to. I was like, great. So she leaves. And you know that they're right there on the other side of the window or of the mirror. You can't see them, but you know that they're there. So she comes back in and she says, you're reacting to the question about credit card usage. I go, what? And she says, yes. Are you irresponsible with your credit cards? I go, no. I don't have any balance on my credit cards. I pay my credit cards in full every month. I'm still laughing about it all these years later. This is 25 years ago. No, it's 35 years ago. 35 years ago. So she asked me again the credit card question, and I answered no. And then she's like, okay, we're done. So she starts unhooking me. And I said, how did I do? And she said, we're not allowed to say. And she winked at me. And I was like, oh my God, I can't believe I passed. So I went home and I said to my wife, I think I passed. And then Bob called and he says, they're fighting over you at headquarters.
Love Bob.
Bob was great. It turned out that Bob was the director of HR for the entire CIA. I would never, ever have even met someone so important as this guy had it not been for Jerry Post. Jerry Post, God bless him, who just died of COVID a year ago. But man, Jerry was good to me, really good to me. Even later in life, he was even better to me.
Yeah.
So, so I got multiple offers from the agency, and I decided not to go into operations right away because I was a Middle East specialist. And
so, sorry to cut you off. Before we get into that, I want to stay on the interview process.
Oh, sure.
It's just funny. They walk away, and you're probably sitting there thinking, "Please don't be the question about having sex with a man."
That's exactly what I thought. Because I didn't mind getting cut from the process, but then my buddies are going to say, "Hey, so what was it that screwed you up?" And I'd be like, they asked me if I had sex with a man, and I said no, and they didn't believe me, and so I was worried.
Right.
So when she said it was the credit cards, I was like, "Oh my God, okay."
So, what were some of the other questions that you mentioned were disturbing that stands out, and why? What is the point of them asking those sorts of questions? Like, what are they trying to select for?
That's a good question. So I didn't know for a long time what the purpose of any of these questions was. 10 years later, I happened to be transferred overseas, and one of my colleagues was a former polygrapher. And I asked him that question. What was the point of all these weird questions? And he said, I can best answer your question with some anecdotes. He goes, look, I've been a polygrapher for 25 years. And over the course of 25 years, I've had people, applicants mostly, admit to every crime you can imagine, including murder. Because they think, oh, this is the CIA, I'm going to do some wet work. They're going to be impressed that I killed this guy in Syracuse and I buried his body under the train tracks, right? Wait, they're not impressed. They're calling the FBI before you can leave the building, and then the FBI is going to come and take you away, which is exactly what happened. So he said, it's the purpose is to rattle you. He said, one of the things that we do, and he said, you may remember this, we always start off by saying, we're not looking for perfect people. We're looking for honest people. So just answer the questions truthfully. And if there's something that you did in your past, admit to it and we'll get through it. That's bullshit. They're not going to help you get through it. They're going to call the FBI and they're going to report your confession that you just made to a federal officer. So if you've done something, if you've committed a felony, don't apply for a job at the CIA and then confess it to the polygrapher. That's not going to work for you. So he told me that, there was a guy who admitted to a murder in Syracuse and they got him walking out of the polygrapher's office. He said there was a guy that was a janitor of all things. Because, even the janitors need to have security clearances. You're in the CIA. We have classified stuff hanging up on the walls everywhere you turn your head. And so you get a pre-employment polygraph. You get one after 3 years. That's your probationary period. And then every 5 years for the rest of your career. So he said this was a normal 5-year, they call it a reinvestigation poly. Now, in the hire, and in the 3-year, they ask you what are called lifestyle questions. That is, are you gay? Are you bi? Are you leather? Are you crazy? Are you a pervert? Do you like to beat prostitutes? They ask you all that stuff. After the 3 years, they don't ask you any of that stuff anymore. Because by then they figure, we know each other well enough that you're going to be okay. So he said, because they don't ask those lifestyle questions anymore, he would always throw an extra question in at the end, open-ended. Is there anything that we haven't talked about that you think is important? 99% of the people say no. Some people say, what do you mean? He said, well, to this janitor, things like murder, rape, robbery, bestiality. And the guy says, what was that last one? And my friend says, I knew I had him. He goes, bestiality. The guy says, what's that mean? And my friend says, it's actually very common, he says. Everybody does it. It's having sex with an animal. And the guy says, I may have done that 3 times. And my friend says, okay, well, like I said, everybody does it, but just so we can get past it for the purpose of the polygraph, in what cases would you have sex with an animal? The guy says, well, sometimes when I have a fight with my wife, to get back at her, I go to the barn and I bugger the horse. Because it's her horse. He said he gets up on a step stool and he gets the horse. And he's like, okay, and you've done this more than once? He said, I may have done it 3 times. So he said, needless to say, they escorted him out of headquarters and took his badge and said, don't ever come back.
Yes.
But I never had to deal with anything like that. I used to, in fact, for my 5-year, I had been in like 8 years at that point, and I mentioned to one of my coworkers, I said, oh, I got to drive out to Vienna. I got my polygraph. And so his polygraph had taken 2 days because he was stuck on this question. Have you ever had unauthorized contact with a foreign intelligence service?
It's an important one.
It's an important one. So my polygraph took 40 minutes because I never did anything. And I come back and he had gone to lunch when I was getting ready to leave for the polygraph. He came back from lunch and I'm sitting at the desk. And he goes, dude, I thought you had a polygraph. You better get going. I said, no, I did it. I'm back. He goes, come on. I said, no, I did it. He said, I was on for 2 days and they made me cry, he says. I said, I don't talk to Libyans at cocktail parties, which was his problem. I said, I've never done anything. I'm clean. And so that was it. I never, ever had a problem with a polygraph.
So was Dr. Post a case officer?
No. Dr. Post was a legitimate psychiatrist. So he was at the CIA as a psychiatrist. And then in the 1970s, he said, we can do so much more as psychiatrists. Because what he was doing there was to treat case officers who went crazy. Well, there aren't that many that go crazy, really. And so he said, what we can do is we can create this unit that does long-distance psychiatric evaluations of foreign leaders. So when they come to the United States, we can say, oh, President so-and-so is an alcoholic. So get him liquored up, and that's when you want to start the trade talks, right? Or there was one foreign leader, an allied leader, who President Clinton was very friendly with, and we knew that this foreign leader loved to play chess, and he loved to eat sausage. All kinds of sausage. So we all huddled together like, okay, he's coming for an official visit. What do we do? And one of Dr. Post's people said, we stuff him full of sausage until he can't eat any more sausage. He can't hold any sausage. And then Clinton invites him to play chess. The sausage is going to make him drowsy. And when he gets drowsy, he gets chatty to keep himself awake. And then we'll give Clinton a list of sensitive questions to ask so we can learn some stuff that we otherwise haven't learned. So that's what Jerry Post did. He created this group called the Political Psychology Division, and their job was just to look at foreign leaders and their mental states. Now, 99% of those you're never going to meet, and it's actually, in practice, it's actually unethical for a psychologist or a psychiatrist to make a determination on someone's mental state without an actual in-person examination. But, this isn't a perfect world. Yeah. So I'd call over there and say, hey, I need 500 words on Saddam Hussein, or I need 500 words on Deng Xiaoping. And then they would do their psychiatric evaluation in 500 words, and I would include it in my bigger piece. And then it would go to the president, the vice president, Secretary of State, Secretary of Defense, and the National Security Advisor. That's what Jerry did. It's a lasting legacy at the CIA. It's still there.
That's super interesting. And the reason I asked is I'm thinking about what other... I'm just thinking about in terms of, CIA employees being under official cover, doing jobs within the United States. How many of those people are there?
That I can't say. In the 1980s, CIA Director Bill Casey, this was during the Reagan administration, CIA Director Bill Casey decided to create a domestic division called the National Resources Division. And NR Division does not do traditional spying. It's illegal for the CIA to spy on U.S. soil. But Casey, the notorious criminal that he was actually right on about National Resources Division. He said, look, we've got patriotic businessmen and corporate leaders all over America who are doing business in China and the Soviet Union and Cuba at the time, and all these countries that are called denied areas, denied to us, where we're not allowed to have a presence there. We're not allowed to conduct espionage there. It's too risky. It's too dangerous. He said, let's just hire a group of case officers to interview business leaders, right? We'll just go and say, hi, we're from the CIA. Here's our business card. We know you're a patriotic American. Can we ask you some questions about your recent trip? And they always say yes. And so that's what this domestic division does. There are offices all over America. You'd never know they were there. There's nothing clandestine that's happening. It's all on the up and up. And they produce an insane amount of intelligence.
That's fascinating. So yeah, as you briefly mentioned before, so you finish the interview and application process, you get accepted to the agency.
Yep.
Your first job is as an analyst.
Yes.
We'll talk about Iraq later, so we'll come back to that. But so let's talk about becoming a case officer.
Yep.
What is the farm?
The farm used to be this top secret facility that we have. Now everybody knows what the farm is. The farm is the CIA's clandestine training facility. It's in Virginia. It's in Virginia. And it's where almost all of your operational training is going to take place. Everything from counter-terrorist driving to all of your weapons qualifications to airborne, where they train you how to jump out of a plane and how to use a parachute. Then they do the nuts and bolts, how to recruit spies to steal secrets, exercises. You know, there are other facilities too, things like bomb training, specialized stuff out in the desert, out west. But most of it, 80% of it, is at the farm. So you go, they've got dorms, I guess you could call them dorms, and classrooms and tracks and shooting ranges and anything you need. I mean, the thing is like thousands of acres. So anything you need to do, you can do at the farm.
What was your favorite thing that you did there?
You know, everybody loved shooting the most. It was the driving for me. It was the driving for me. My God, I got so much out of that class. I still use it. I still use what I learned all these years later. We did things like, the course was colloquially known as crash and bang. So you crash cars and you shoot guns and, you know, and then you do cool stuff like one night we did night shooting a lot, but we did like rocket launchers. Like, where else are you going to do rocket launchers? Grenade launchers and blow shit up and blow cars up, and that was so much fun. But for me, the driving was better because they put you in these scenarios where I got to be careful I don't go into too much detail, but you got a blindfold on, okay? You're in the driver's seat and you're driving like a mile an hour with a blindfold on, and they're steering for you. And they say, okay, I'm going to take the blindfold off, and you have 2 seconds to react. Okay, so they take the blindfold off, and just as they take the blindfold off, you notice in your peripheral vision, there's a guy with an AK-47 who's trying to open your door. And then there are 2 guys in front of you, and they have their cars in a V, but which way is it? Is it a V like this, or is it a V like this? So if it's a V like this, you got to gun it and crash right through. If it's a V like this, you're just going to wedge yourself and they're going to blow your brains out. So you have to put it in reverse before this guy shoots you with a paintball. And you got to go reverse, 50, 60, 70 miles an hour. They teach you how to hit the brakes, neutral, spin around, drive without ever coming to a stop, and you take off, and they call it getting off the X. So you do this 3 times, and you fuck it up one time, you're dead. That's it. You're dead. So I was good at that. My response time was very quick. It was under a second. And it's little stuff that people forget that get you killed. You forget to lock your door. Always, always, always lock the door. Always. I mean, even now, the risk of being carjacked at a red light or stop sign or something is real. That lock may buy you an extra second or 2 seconds, which is really all you need to get off the dime. So I was good at that. And then they marry the two, guns and cars. So you go through these very elaborate, complicated exercises where they have a device on all the cars where they can kill the engine remotely. So you're just driving down the track, minding your own business, and your car dies. And so you drive over, no, you drift over to the side. Now we're using all live ammo here, by the way. And so
Really?
yeah, you pull over and you hear a gunshot. Now they haven't shot directly at you. They shot in the air, so you hear the gunshot. So you have to crouch down so that they can't get you through the. You have live ammo, they don't. They can't get you through the windshield. And then you put it in park, you crawl across the seat, get out the passenger side, lay on the ground, you've got your gun, and you have to look to see where the shooting's coming from. Well, the shooting is coming from these robots that they have. They're automated, and they've got little targets on them, black and white rings. So the thing is shooting at you, it's shooting blanks, and you're on the ground and you have to, bang, bang. And then you hear a shot over there, bang, bang. But sometimes you can't quite get it because the robots turn to the side or the targets turn to the side. So on your belly, you have to go to the back of the car and then get it from that angle. Well, there was one point that I just couldn't get a clear shot. And what it was, across the way, there was a van. And the sliding door of the van had opened and the robot was in the van and the robot's firing at me and I just can't get a clean shot. So I pop up and I shoot out my own windows. They give you these beater Ford Tauruses. I shoot out my own windows and I go bang, bang, and I get it. So they sound this air horn, which means, weapons down. So you holster your weapon. And the instructor comes out, he goes, "Well, you passed. But damn it, Kiriakou, you just cost me $900 in broken windshields." I said, "I couldn't get a clean shot. I'm sorry." We did this one exercise, it was at night. We drew straws to see who would go first, and I went first. So all you know in this scenario is you are in a flea bag hotel in El Salvador. Good luck. So it's just a table and a chair. And it looks like a flea bag hotel. I mean, it's like a Hollywood set. I mean, this is real life. They make it look like it really is going to look in real life. So you're sitting there, you're not really sure what to expect. And there's a knock on the door and you say, "Who is it?" And then the door opens and it's these two guys and one of them is holding a vacuum cleaner and they're saying, "Housekeeping, senor, housekeeping." And I go, "I don't need housekeeping. I don't need housekeeping." And then the second guy behind him pulls out a gun. He goes, bang, bang. He shoots me with 2 paint pellets. I go, fuck. I said, "I never saw that coming." And one of the instructors says, "If you're in a shithole motel, in a shithole country, and 2 people just walk into your room, kill them." And he's like, "Don't tell anybody else what the exercise is." So I go back out to the van. We're all sitting in the van waiting our turn. And I got these 2 paint things here. And one of them just says, "Shit." And I said, "Yeah, I can't talk about it." So all 8 of us failed. All 8 of us failed. that was such an important lesson. I never, ever forgot it. And so anytime I felt threatened or anytime I felt, you know what, in this situation I'm in right now, I can see a point 10 seconds down the road where I might feel threatened, I would draw my weapon just in case. It happened twice, just in case. Then we went through something you've, I'm sure, seen on TV. It's a shooting gallery. So you've got your gun out, and the instructor's right behind you, and he's got his hand on your shoulder, and a guy pops up in a window, and he's got a machine gun, and you go bang bang, and he plops down, and then a woman pops up holding a baby over here, and you have to make sure not to shoot her. If you shoot her, you fail. I have chills thinking about it. It taken me back. I haven't talked about this in decades. And so, crazy as it sounds, I got 100%. I was like a friggin' marksman. And yet the funny thing is, on the very first day of the weapons training, like I say, there were 8 of us. And the instructor said, anybody here not own a gun? And I raised my hand. And I kind of looked around, and I was the only guy that had his hand up. He goes, you don't own a gun. And I said, truth be told, I've never actually touched a real gun. And he goes, oh my God. Okay. We're going to have to start from the very beginning. And I ended up testing first in the class to the point where one of the instructors said, you should give some thought to competitive shooting.
Wow.
And so I did. And I ended up like winning trophies in skeet. I just had a knack for it. I had a very steady hand, and it served me well.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
That's so interesting about the scenarios they set up, like you said, at the motel and with the blindfold. Is it a matter of like, how fast can you process information and make decisions with the available information?
Yes.
Is that kind of what they're
That's
testing
exactly
for?
what it is. And not just in the shooting, but in the driving too. You might have seen on one of these old time cop shows like Adam 12, for example. I've seen this on Adam 12. You're speeding toward 3 red lights, right? There are 3 lanes. You're in the middle lane, red, red, red. And 1 second before you get to the red lights, one of them turns green. And you have to swerve as fast as you can to the green light. And if you go through the lane with the red light, you fail. And if you fail, you can't go overseas. And so it was the same thing with the driving, man. I aced the counterterrorism driving. I aced it to the point where they came up to me afterwards and said, when are you leaving for overseas? And I said, oh, I still have 2 more months. And they said, we want you to take the advanced driving class. It's out in the Nevada desert. He said, that's real counterterrorism driving. And so I went out there, and it was like driving over sand dunes. And what do you do if you get stuck in the sand? And it was good stuff. I learned a lot. Mm-hmm.
So when you're going through this, and you mentioned a couple times, like if you fuck up once, you're done.
Done.
So you're thinking to yourself, this is something I really want for my life. And there's a lot of pressure, especially you never fired a gun before and you're taking shooting tests. How did you, and I'll expand this question throughout your career, but how did you compartmentalize stress and dealing with it in that course and throughout the rest of your career?
That's a very important question. It would be a lie to say that I was as good at compartmentalizing the stress as I thought I was. We all think we're so smart and so good and so advanced and so much better than everybody else, and we're not. We're human beings. My first wife was not a CIA officer. She was a ballet teacher. And I couldn't tell her anything. And so I thought I was compartmentalizing this very nicely. And I'd go home and she'd say, how was work? And I'd say, great. What'd you do? Nothing. Did you talk to anybody interested? Nope. Well, how'd you spend your day? The office. None of that was true. But she wasn't cleared for the information. And so it got to the point where I'd go home and she'd say, what'd you do at work today? Nothing. What was her name? And I'd say, Joanne, I'm not cheating on you. I'm seriously not cheating on you. Yeah? Then why'd you leave at midnight and not come home until 6? I was working. Uh-huh. At 3 o'clock in the morning. Uh-huh. I'd say, yeah, I was. You're just going to have to take my word for it. So that doesn't last very long.
Yeah, it's I would imagine not easy on marriages, and that's probably why the agency encourages like
Agency
interagency
romances.
relationships.
Yeah, because you're both cleared and you can both talk about it. So when I went to Pakistan, I was dating a senior CIA officer. We ended up getting married. And the day I was leaving Pakistan, just as an example, um, I was supposed to head straight home, and we were going to get on a plane and fly to Santa Fe, New Mexico for a vacation, decompress from Pakistan, and have a good time. So here I am, 2 hours before leaving the embassy, and I get a cable from headquarters, and it says, "Don't return. Instead, go to this other country. We want you to break into an apartment and plant a bug." And I was like, damn it. I really needed that vacation. We just caught Abu Zubaydah. I'm all stressed out. So I called her and I said, "Listen, I have really bad news." And she said, "No, I saw the cable. Go do your break-in. We'll go to Santa Fe some other time." And so I went and broke into this house and planted a bug. And a month later, then we went to Santa Fe.
I'll be right back.
Yeah.
So let's set the stage for your first case officer job. What is the role of a case officer or a spy?
Yeah. The role of a case officer is very, very simple. It's to recruit spies to steal secrets. Period. That's it. Now, it's more complicated than that in the actual implementation of the job. But the goal is really that simple. So, people have this romantic view that you're going to infiltrate a terrorist group. No, you're not. Most of those guys have blonde hair and blue eyes and don't speak a word of Arabic. You're not infiltrating anybody. But you're going to find somebody who can infiltrate a terrorist group. So there's something called the asset acquisition cycle. This is the very first thing that they teach you when you go into case officer training. The asset acquisition cycle is spot, assess, develop, recruit. You have to spot someone who is going to be what they call operationally interesting. For example, you are a nice guy. I like hanging out with you, but you're not operationally interesting to me because you don't have access to classified information and you don't have access to a terrorist group. So we may go out and have a beer, but I'm not going to actively seek to recruit you and to make you a CIA asset. Now, we also call assets agents. I wasn't a CIA agent. I was a CIA officer, and the person I recruited is the agent. So, spot, assess, develop, recruit. In a perfect world, I'm going to go to a diplomatic cocktail party, and I'm going to spot a Russian, a Chinese, a Cuban, an Iranian, a North Korean, etc., etc. And then I'm going to say, "Hey, how about lunch?" And I'm going to take you to lunch, and I'm going to pay, of course, because I have a budget that is literally unlimited. Literally. And then I'm going to take you to dinner. And then I'm going to invite you and your wife to dinner with my wife and me. And then our wives are going to become friends. And you're going to mention to me that you like fishing. And so I'm going to charter a boat and I'm going to take you deep sea fishing and we're going to have a blast. And then your wife is going to say how much she enjoys living in that city because the skyline's so beautiful. So I'm going to rent a helicopter and we're going to go on a sunset helicopter tour of the skyline. And then our kids are going to become friends. And we're going to get to the point in between 9 and 18 months where you consider me to be your best friend. We're best friends. Now, I have a personality where I can manipulate people like that. I can turn it on and off. And I'm not proud of that. It's just the way my brain is wired. Some guys can't turn it off. And that's why they have 5 marriages and they, go to prostitutes and they steal from people and, whatever. I did it because I believed we were the good guys and I was doing it in service to my country. So after 9 months, I'm also going to be looking for what we call vulnerabilities. Now, a vulnerability may be that you really, really love your kids. Now, because you love your kids so much, you want your kids to go to the best university. Well, not only can I get your kid into the best university, and just name the university. Stanford, Harvard, Millersville State College, I don't care. Pick it. We'll get them in. But I'll pay for it if you give me 2 hours in your code room, or you give me the plans to that new Russian tank, right?
Yeah.
Or a soil sample from your nuclear power plant. I'll do whatever you want. But I can only have that conversation if you are my best friend. Now, let me back up to the application process for a moment. When we were going through the application process, a bunch of us in the room, the interviewer said, let's go over a scenario. Let's say, and remember, none of us have been hired yet. Let's say you're a CIA officer overseas and you get a cable from headquarters saying that they need for you to get, let's say, the latest Indonesian trade numbers. What do? Everybody agreed. We invite the Indonesian economic officer to lunch. Okay, that's how you start. And then you invite him to dinner. And then you invite him to dinner with his wife and your wife, just like I laid out. But after 9 months, you determine that this guy is not recruitable. He doesn't have any vulnerabilities. He doesn't need any money. He doesn't have any kids. He's perfectly happy in his life. There's no hook for you to recruit him. What do? One guy raised his hand and he said, you double down. Even if it takes another year, you just keep working him. Maybe something will come up. One guy raised his hand and said, maybe you bring your wife into it, which is a big no-no. Unless she's CIA and she gets approved from headquarters. Bring your wife into it. Maybe the wife can talk to his wife. And I'm looking around like, it seemed obvious to me. I raised my hand. I said, you break into his embassy and steal it. He goes, that's exactly what you do. That's exactly what you do. You write to headquarters, you say, send out a locks and picks team. We're going to break into the embassy at 2:00 in the morning. We're going to take down the security cameras. We're going to steal the document, get back out, turn the cameras back on. Nobody has any idea we were there.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, I could do that. I have kind of a knack for that. Sure. And then, that was another thing. You have to be able to think very, very quickly on your feet. I had to do a break-in one time. We believed that there was a woman who was a member of a terrorist group, and we believed that she had one of the weapons in her apartment. So I flew out to this country, and I was working with the host country intelligence service. It was a joint operation, so everything was on the up and up.
I'm assuming you can't say where that was.
No. And so I fly in, my people pick me up, they take me to the intelligence service headquarters for the briefing. So I meet their team and they said, here's the scenario. She lives in this luxury apartment building. There are 2 apartments on every floor. So it's this tall, skinny apartment building, condo building. So she's on the 6th floor. She's the apartment on the left. So there's A and B. I said, so who's in B? They said, don't worry about it. It's a government employee, married to a lawyer, and they're both at work. I said, okay, great. This will be easy. So they say the target every single day She leaves her apartment at 10 o'clock. She buys a newspaper and she goes to a coffee shop. He said, we're going to have a team on her to make sure that she doesn't leave the coffee shop early. She usually stays there an hour or two. If she leaves early, we'll call and abort the operation. I said, perfect. This is going to be a piece of cake. So we get to the apartment building. We didn't want to take the elevator because the elevator makes a sound. So I go with a lock picker and we walk up the 6 flights. And just like they said, there's apartment A and apartment B. So the lock picker puts his little tool into the lock and he starts doing this to jimmy it. He's got these tools that look like very thick needles, right? So he's doing this. And I hear a voice in apartment B. And I was like, that's got to be a mistake. Apartment B's at work. And I hear a baby cry, like a newborn baby. And I was like, oh my God, she just had a baby and they didn't know it. And she's on maternity leave. I'm thinking to myself, the guy is doing the lock, like as silently as possible. And I hear a woman's voice say in Arabic, I think there's someone outside in the hall. And I go, stop. So he stops. He's just frozen. And then the husband says, I don't hear anything in the hall. I go, and he starts doing it. And then she says, no, I think I hear something out there. I go, stop. And he stops. And we're frozen. And the husband says, you're imagining things. There's nothing out there. I go. And he starts doing this. And she says, I definitely hear something. And she opens the door. And just as she opens the door, I turn to block him. And she says, who are you? And I said, hi. I said, I go, Anna Mohammed Ahmed. I'm Mohammed Ahmed. I said, I'm looking for my aunt, Miriam Ahmed. And she goes, there's no Miriam Ahmed here. I said, is this, 123 Main Street? And she's like, no, this is 125 Main Street. 123 is next door. I said, oh, I'm so sorry. And she said, okay. And she looks at me funny. And I said, congratulations on your baby. She's holding the baby. She's like, thank you. And she goes back in and closes the door. And I go, go. And it clicked. And we went into the apartment. I was like, man, that was the closest call I ever had. So we never found the weapon. We never found anything in there of interest. And then we waited until they were going about their business again. And then we, as quietly as possible, left. And afterwards, we met up with, it's called a hot wash. You go over the entire operation. We went back to the headquarters. I was like, you guys, like, seriously fucked up. They were both, the whole family was in that apartment. Yeah, that was a close one.
Wow, that's a great story. I have so many questions on that. So one of the things you said is about her morning routine. She went to the coffee shop every morning, and that's what's called pattern of life.
Yep.
Do you still mix yours up? Like, how is that? I'm sure you were taught that in surveillance detection at the farm and,
Yes.
Through the tradecraft schools. How does that impact your life today? Do you still mix up your pattern of life and do all that?
I do, for a couple of reasons. First of all, later on in my career, I became a surveillance and surveillance detection instructor. So I'd work my normal job during the day, and then at night, I was part of an instructor's team that would train new officers in surveillance and surveillance detection. So I took it very, very seriously. And I write at length in my first book about how seriously I took surveillance when I was stationed in Athens. And even still, I almost bought it, and my next door neighbor instead was assassinated. So you've got to be very diligent, very serious about your personal safety, and especially about surveillance and surveillance detection. after I left the agency, I maintained those skills. I wrote another book called The CIA Insider's Guide to Surveillance and Surveillance Detection. I taught a university level class at George Washington University on surveillance and surveillance detection. And then I noticed right off the bat that the FBI is following me, right? So, yeah, you never know who's going to be following you. It could be a private eye because your spouse doesn't trust you. It could be a carjacker or a mugger or the FBI or, the local cops or whatever. You just never know. It's more common than you might think. So it's only very recently, and I mean like in the last year, that I don't leave my house at a different time every day. I just don't care anymore. Nobody's interested in me anymore, So now I have a pattern. And for almost my entire adult life, I never established a pattern. Never. It's too dangerous, too risky.
Interesting. And another thing you said about having a knack for creating these friendships. When I think about like intrinsic likability, I heard another case officer, Jim Lawler, in an interview. He said,
Jim's a good guy.
Yeah, he seems like I would love to have him on. He said when he was taking somebody out to dinner that he was trying to recruit as an asset, and the guy said to him, Jim, when I talk to you, I feel like my brain is just in a warm bubble bath.
See?
And when I met you, I thought to myself, you know what? Like, I like John. I like him a lot.
That's how I judge people. Would I like to have a beer with this guy?
Yeah.
Yes, I would.
So when you create that relationship with an asset, is it real or is it fake?
Another good question. In about 50% of the cases, it's real. So of the people that I recruited over the course of my career, half of them were genuine bad guys. Genuine terrorists, murderers, psychopaths. And it was a transactional relationship. Money for information. The other half were guys that I genuinely liked, and they genuinely liked me. And after I went public, now a lot of these recruitments, a lot of these operations, I was doing an alias, not using my real name. And there were two who saw me on TV after I went public, two who I had recruited in alias, who reached out to me and said, "Hey, remember me?" And I'm like, "How could I possibly forget you?" And one of them still sends me Christmas cards. Crazy. So yeah, you're not all sociopaths. Some of these people you really genuinely like. I had one asset who cried when I left the country. He actually cried. Yeah, good guy. Good guy. He was I don't want to get too far down into the weeds, but when he was initially recruited, he was recruited only with special permission of the director because he was considered to be a terrorist. He wasn't a terrorist. He had friends who were terrorists, but these friends were friends from like elementary school, from childhood. You know how they say in Irish neighborhoods of Boston, you either grow up to be a cop or a mobster? It was the same thing, right? He grew up to be, I won't say what he was, but he grew up to be a normal law-abiding citizen, and all of his childhood friends were terrorists. And so he was initially recruited. I didn't recruit him. He was initially recruited by a specialized counterterrorism officer who flew out just for the recruitment because it was deemed to be too dangerous for me to do it. And then once he was recruited and polygraphed, he turned him over to me. Well, I realized, yeah, this guy has access to some of the most dangerous people in this country, but he's a genuinely good guy. And so not only did I handle him for the 2 years that I was in this country, But even when I transferred back to headquarters, I would continue to fly out once a month to handle him. And I was able to get his paperwork transferred from the terrorist designation to the equivalent of the good guy designation. And then when I finally said, listen, I decided to resign and I'm going to go into the private sector. I'm going to move back to the States. He just burst into tears. Yeah, crazy.
Is espionage an art or science?
Oh, it's very much an art. Very much an art. I sat next to a guy in Arabic class. I admired this guy so much. We were contemporaries, same age, but he was a good-looking, well-built, smart case officer. His father had been a senior CIA case officer, and this colleague of mine had a knack for Arabic. His Arabic, like how he learned Arabic as quickly as he did, it was amazing to me. I just admired his smarts, and he was fun to be around. And I said to him one time, you know what, man? I would let you recruit me. I said, you've won me over. You really have a knack for this. So we finished Arabic. I went to the country I was going to. He went to the country he was going to. And then he cables me. And he said, hey, you going to be in my neck of the woods anytime soon? And I said, not necessarily, but there's a 3-day weekend coming up. How about if I come out and we'll hang out and have a couple of beers? And he said, great. And I thought, that's kind of odd, but okay. So I fly out to his country. He picks me up at the airport. And I was like, so how's it going? And this big tear just drops from his eye. And I'm looking at him like, and he goes, I'm not cut out for this job. I go, what do you mean you're not cut out for this job? You were the best of all of us in the training. He said, I can't do it. I can't convince people to commit treason for me. I can't do it. My gut just won't let me do it. He said, I feel so guilty. I'm manipulating them. I'm lying to them. They think that we're friends, and they're not my friends. He said, I can't do it. But my dad was a superstar of the CIA. He said, I can't let my dad down. I go, what are you going to do? He goes, how many people have you recruited? I said, 2 so far. He goes, I haven't done any. I'm going to get passed over for promotion, and if I don't get any in the next 6 months, they're going to curtail my assignment, and they're going to send me back to headquarters for more training. He said, I can't do it. I said, dude, you got to nip this in the bud then. Don't drag it out. If it's not for you, it's not for you. He said, but I don't want another job in the agency. I don't want to be a paper pusher. I don't want to be an analyst. I said, you should quit and do whatever makes you happy. He became a veterinarian. Yeah. He said that's what would make him happy. He had a 3-legged dog and he was always taking in these strays. I'm like, your house looks like a friggin' menagerie, man. But that's the only thing that made him happy. He became a veterinarian. And his dad was not disappointed in him. It's for you, it's not for you. No problem. But it's an art. Either you're cut out for it or you're not. And if you're not, that's perfectly cool. I worked with another guy. His dad had been the deputy director of the CIA for operations.
That's the highest ranking spy?
The highest ranking spy. The boss of all spies in all divisions. This guy had a congenital heart defect, and he had open heart surgery as an infant. So he had this wicked scar right down the middle of his chest, and he couldn't pass the medical exam because you have to be you're jumping out of planes and, shooting people, and you got to be in good shape. And so his dad got him a waiver because all he was every day, I want to be a case officer. I want to be a case officer. I want to be a case officer. Okay, all right. Your dad's the boss. So his dad's like, case officer. He goes through the training, arrogant son of a gun, arrogant. And his last name was was unique. So it's not like everybody's got this name. Like, oh, is your dad? Yeah, it's my dad. So we were going out to this assignment. We ended up going to the same country. And he just fell flat on his face. He just couldn't pull the trigger. Like, he would say, I think I'm getting them to the point where they're going to be ready for the pitch. And I said to him one day, buddy, I'm reading your outgoing cables. They were ready for the pitch 6 months ago. They're like recruiting themselves and offering them up to you and themselves up to you. All you have to do is ask the question. Oh, I don't know. What if they say no? They could blow my cover. Yeah, that's the risk we run. They'll blow your cover, and then you get thrown out of the country. So be a big boy and make the pitch. He ended up saying, this job's not for me. Went back to headquarters, pushing paper.
Nepotism at the CIA.
There was another case officer, a woman, smart. She had gone to Yale as an undergrad, and then she went to Michigan for a master's degree in international affairs. Spoke beautiful Farsi, and the station chief came to me one day and said, this woman in your branch, she's just not working out. I go, really? I'm so surprised. She inherited several agents, but she writes no intelligence. And I said, wow. I said, it was always my personal view that if you do an operational meeting, you're taking the risk of doing an operational meeting. So you're doing a 3-hour surveillance detection route before the meeting, right? To make sure you're not being followed. You do the meeting for 2 hours, and then you do another 2-hour route home to make sure you're not being followed. That's a commitment, and it's dangerous. And then you get back to the embassy, and you're like, I got nothing to report. They didn't say anything interesting. Okay, first of all, you're lying. Second of all, if you weren't lying and they didn't say anything interesting, you need to fire them. Because that $2,000 a month or $5,000 or $10,000 a month we're paying them, we can pay to somebody else who is giving us intelligence. So the station chief said, do me a favor and go with her on her next operational meeting and explain to her what intelligence is. So I said to her beforehand, I said, listen, the chief said I should go with you. She said, yeah, I heard. And I said, you're going to do the interview, and I'll take notes. And then after it's all over, we'll go over what is reportable intelligence. And I said, but I'll tell you, my own bias is if you come out of an operational meeting without at least one intelligence reporting cable, you have failed. That's a failure. So we do the meeting, fascinating agent, not someone I would have focused on, but fascinating nonetheless. And we finish the meeting. We all shake hands. The agent leaves. I go, what did you think? And she goes, I really didn't get anything out of that. I said, I got 5 intelligence reports out of that meeting. She says, how? So I started going over my notes. He said this. That's going to be interesting to the such and such division. He said that. I think the Counter Narcotics Center would like to know that. Then he said this, and the other thing. And I said, all you have to know is how headquarters works and what the different divisions and groups are in headquarters. And then you tailor your questions to their issues. Everybody has what's called an OD, an operating directive. It goes from tier 0 to tier 5. Tier 0 is they're coming over the walls of the embassy, report it immediately. Okay, so that's terrorism, Russia, North Korean nuclear program, let's say. I'm making this up. Tier 1 is stuff that you need to pretty much drop everything and collect on this. Tier 2 is stuff that's important, but don't, go crazy. Tier 3 is if you happen to develop it in the course of your interview, report it. That's what all of this stuff was. Tier 4 is like, an analyst had a question, but don't kill yourself. Tier 5 is nobody really gives a shit anymore, so don't bother. Well, all of this stuff was Tier 2 and Tier 3, and she just wasn't getting it. And so after I left the agency, I ran into her at the mall one time. And I said, "How are things going?" She said, "I'm not a case officer anymore." She said, "That job just wasn't for me. I just didn't know what was important." So she said she had transferred to liaison. And what liaison does is when we have visiting dignitaries come, she lays out the buffet and, takes them to dinner and whatever. Not something I would have wanted to do.
So last thing on this before we move into Greece, when you're talking about finding vulnerabilities and assets,
Mhm.
there's revenge, ideology,
Uh-huh.
mentioned greed,
Uh-huh.
money.
Yep.
What's the best for John?
Greed. Greed's the best. Even people who you suspect might be willing to do it for ideology are doing it for the money. In my entire CIA career, I only had one agent who I recruited who refused to take any money. He did it just because he liked me. And then in the end, I said, "Listen, you got to let me do something for you. You got to. Let me get you a Rolex or something." He's like, "No." He said, "Well, I make $20,000 a year. I'm going to walk around with a Rolex." I said, "You got to let me do something." He said, "Listen, my grandson really wants to go to school in the United States." I said, "Done." And he said, "No, I don't want you to pay for it. Um, his English isn't perfect, and I'm not sure he would get through the application process, but he really wants to go to the University of Oklahoma." And I go, "Really? I can get him into Harvard, Yale, Stanford, Dartmouth, name it." He said he wants to go to the University of Oklahoma. I said, "Okay, done." That was it. Got him in. We have a whole office that just does that.
Yeah, it's a good one.
Yeah.
So, your first case officer job, you go to Greece,
Mm-hmm.
which was probably nice for you.
Yeah, it was great.
What were you doing over there?
I was very specifically assigned to disrupt a terrorist group called Revolutionary Organization 17 November. It was the deadliest terrorist group in the history of Greece. They had murdered 28 people, including the CIA station chief, 2 American defense attaches, and a poor, hapless Air Force technical sergeant doing his laundry in the basement laundry room of his apartment building. They were incredibly lethal and successful, and extraordinarily dangerous to all Americans in Greece. Greece was ranked as what's called critical threat for terrorism in those days. Critical is the highest level threat. We spent more money on security in Athens than we spent in Beirut at the time,
And what year was this, by the way?
1998 to 2000. The Greeks ended up cracking the group in 2002. It no longer exists. But that was one incredibly tough job. And to make it tougher, we weren't able to identify a single member of the group. They were so good at masking their identities. We had suspects. We had 500 suspects, and the group only ended up having but a dozen people in it. But there were other groups. There was one called Popular Revolutionary Struggle. There was one called Revolutionary Nuclei. There was Sons of the Anarchic something or other. I forget. They were mostly anarchist groups, but Popular Revolutionary Struggle and Revolutionary Organization 17 November were legitimate terrorist groups, well-funded, well-financed. We suspected they were getting their weapons from Carlos the Jackal and probably the Libyans at the time. That turned out to be kind of true. They got some weapons from the Libyans, and Popular Revolutionary Struggle did get their weapons from Carlos the Jackal, but not 17 November. It was totally domestic. Yeah.
So you mentioned before the attempt on your life in Greece. Can you tell that story?
Yeah. So surveillance was of the utmost import in Greece because, like I said, we were never able to identify these guys, and they were shooting and in some cases killing embassy employees. They killed and permanently they killed our station chief. They permanently disabled our DEA rep. They killed two of our defense attaches. They tried to kill a State Department officer. I mean, they were on us all the time. And so I was really, really careful about my own security. I was heavily armed all the time.
What did you carry?
I had carried a 9mm Glock in a fanny pack on my waist, and a snub-nose 38 revolver on my ankle, and then just in case, I kept a buck knife in my back pocket. I carried 2 extra magazines in my fanny pack. It was a tearaway, so it was quick action. You know, I even remember going to church with my wife and kids one Sunday and asking God to forgive me for taking all these weapons into church. But I was literally never without them. So I'm at a party one night. This was in March of 2000. I'm at a diplomatic cocktail party, and a guy had just moved in catty corner from me. Our backyards touched catty corner. He was a brigadier general, British. He was the new British defense attaché by the name of Stephen Saunders. And Steve was a great guy, just funny and fun and gregarious and outgoing, the life of the party kind of guy. And his wife was lovely, and they had 2 teenage daughters. So he was making fun of me in a joking way because I drove a fully armored BMW 540. It was the first 540 in Greece. We needed that big engine to carry all the weight of that armor. Even the windows were that thick. I'm not exaggerating. It was the first 540 in Greece. We couldn't even insure it. We had to insure it through a company in Germany, right? So he was making fun of my car. And he said, "You Americans, you're so paranoid about security." He goes, "This is an EU country. It's a NATO country. What are you so afraid of?" And everybody chuckles. And I said, "You Brits live in a dream world if you think because they have palm trees and pretty beaches that they're not going to kill you if they get the chance. Take my word for it," I said. "If they do get the chance, they're going to kill you." And we all laughed. 2 weeks later, I slept in by accident. And what I would do every day is I'd get up at a different time and take a different route to work. So I never established a pattern. And that way it's impossible to do surveillance on me. So sometimes it would take 20 minutes to get to work. Sometimes it would take 2 hours to get to work. And all of us did this. So we all knew you're going to be in eventually. We're all working 12 and 14-hour days anyway. So it's not like you're not going to put in your 8 hours. So we're just driving like crazy people, all over the city. But I slept in and I was like, damn it, it's like 10 o'clock, which means I got to get on the main road, which I never did. Well, I lived exactly 10 miles from the embassy. And it was a straight shot on Kiriakou Boulevard, straight shot down the mountain from my house to the embassy. No turns, no nothing. The problem with that is there were concrete jersey barriers the whole way. So I can't get off. So once you're on, you're committed. So I was like, dang it, I just got to take the most direct way. I'm just going to get on Kiriakou and just go straight. So I get on. It's a parking lot. It's like Cairo or Bangkok. I'm like, what in the world? At 10 o'clock in the morning? So I put on the radio, which I also never did because I didn't want to be distracted. You have to constantly scan your side view mirrors. Constantly. Because 17 November would come up on a motorcycle, two guys on a motorcycle, a driver and the shooter in the back, and they'd put two in your head and then just take off, and no one ever got a glimpse of them. So I'm constantly scanning the side view mirrors and the rearview mirror. And I put on the radio because I'm just sitting there. And they say on the radio, avoid GVCS Avenue because there was a traffic incident at Philothe. Well, Philothe is like at the halfway point. I'm like, dang, I got 5 miles of this? I thought, well, I'm committed. I can't get off. So I'm just sitting there, inching my way down the mountain, 6 feet at a time. And then on the radio, half an hour later, they said, avoid GVCS Avenue. There's been a criminal incident at Philothe. I said, a criminal incident? I've never heard that before. Must be a bank robbery or something. So I'm inching my way down. Finally, as I'm getting to the jam up, they come back on and they say, avoid GVCS Avenue. There was a terrorist attack at Philothe. And as soon as they said terrorist attack, I can see a white Rover, the British Rover, and there's police tape around it. The side window is shot out, and there's just blood spatter all over the back windshield. And I noticed the license plate says YBH and then 4 numbers. Well, Greece was so dangerous that the American embassy didn't get diplomatic plates. It was too alerting. So we got just regular, normal license plates. But the Greeks, in their infinite wisdom, gave everybody in the American embassy plates that began with YHB. Mm-hmm. And I thought, oh, that poor son of a gun, some Greek, they thought they mixed up YHB and YBH, and they killed some innocent Greek. And then I thought, no, wait a minute. YBH is the British embassy. They don't have diplomatic plates either. And that Rover belongs to Steve Saunders. So I get on the phone and I called the station. And I said, listen, I'm stuck in traffic on Kiriakou, and I think somebody just hit Steve Saunders. And my boss said, what do you see? And I said, there's so much blood in this car. He couldn't have lived. So I described what I was seeing. And then I get around his car and they call me back. They said, we just called the British embassy and they were wondering where he was because he wasn't at work. So it turned out they pulled up alongside. The driver shot him with the same 45 that they did all of their hits with, all 28 hits. But the passenger on the back pulled out some kind of a long gun and shot him with an armor-piercing round that blew his right hand completely off. His right hand was on the floor of the passenger side. So they killed him instantly. So a taxi driver and a guy in a car next to him pulled him out of the car, put him in the taxi, and rushed him to the Red Cross hospital. So the Brits called all the hospitals, and the Red Cross said, yes, we have this man in a British military uniform, but he's dead. He was dead. He came in dead on arrival. So they called me back. They said he's dead. So I said, it's chaos out here. I got to the embassy, and my boss said, don't take your jacket off. We're going to go to the service, meaning the host intelligence service. So we pick up the Brits and we go over there. And of course, I had never met the Brits and they had never met me because I'm doing my thing and they're doing their thing, and, never the two shall meet. So I'm like, hi, I'm John. I'm sorry for your loss. Hi, I'm Ian. Hi, I'm, Nigel, whatever. And we go over to the Greeks. The Greeks are like, sorry. And I said, this is the 28th victim. Like, how many more is it going to take before you guys are serious about this? Oh, sorry, but we're committed to working with you to cracking this group. And so we got orders from headquarters that We were to open the files in their entirety to the Brits, and that started a that started a 3-year relationship that I had with the Brits on counterterrorism. I was a regular in London, like all the time, all the time. And then the Greeks just broke the group accidentally in 2002. One of the terrorists was carrying a bomb in a paper bag that he was going to put under the car of a Greek ship owner in Piraeus, and the bomb went off prematurely, and it blew his hands off, and it blew his right eye out. And so he thought he was dying, and he confessed to everything and gave up the location of the guns and the bombs and the safe house and the names of all the other members, and then he lived. And so the Greeks got everybody.
Damn.
Yeah.
So that must have hit a little close to home, huh?
Boy, it sure did. To make matters worse, and the reason why this was so important to me was a couple of months passed. And one of the things that 17 November did was they would always either throw a manifesto down at the site of the hit or mail a manifesto to one of the left-wing newspapers. And so what they did was they waited for several months, and then they mailed their manifesto to the lefty paper. And it said, "Είδαμε τον megalokataskopos." We saw the big spy, but he was in an armored car, and we knew he was armed. So we elected to carry out the revolutionary sentence on the war criminal Saunders. So my boss calls me, and he says, "Have you seen the news?" I said, "No, I'm in the car. What news?" And he says, "They were going to hit you the day that they hit Saunders." I said, "No, I'm so careful about my personal security." He said, "No, they refer to you in the manifesto." I said, "What manifesto?" He said, "They just sent it to Kathimerini." No, it wasn't Kathimerini. Eleftherotypia, the leftist paper. So I get in, and I'm reading it. Everybody's like gathered around me. And my boss says, "You got to go, like right now." I said, "My wife is at home. My kids are at school." He said, "We'll pick them up." So one car took me to the airport. I called my wife. I said, "I don't have time to explain, but a car's coming to get you, and then go to the school and get the kids. And I'm going to meet you at the airport." And I had told her like 2 years earlier, if something terrible should happen, somebody's going to come and pick you up. So just go with it. I couldn't tell her anything else. So they took me to the airport. They picked up my wife. They picked up my kids at the school. They go to the airport. We were on the 12 o'clock Delta flight back to New York. And then the embassy sent a team to my house to just pack everything in boxes and ship it back. And that was it. And months later, I had some pictures developed. My mom and dad had come out to visit us when Steve was killed, like the week after Steve was killed. And I took a picture of my mom. She's on her knee, and she's holding my 2 sons. They were little at the time. They were like 3 and 6. And so I'm on my knee taking a picture of them. And there's a red car in the background. And there's a guy sitting in the car, and he's looking right in the camera. And I thought, boy, that's just so odd. And so I cabled it out saying, "Hey, I know it's all after the fact, but can you run this plate?" And it turned out that the plate was stolen. So I said, how in the world? The only thing we were able to conclude, we've never been able to figure it out, but what we concluded was they were looking at him because he was so public. He was giving interviews to newspapers, and he's on TV at these diplomatic parties. And so they went looking for him. And our houses were right next to each other. And then they saw YHB, and they were like, uh-huh. And that car's armored. that can only mean CIA.
Yeah.
Yeah. That was the first of two
Yeah.
incidents.
Yeah, we'll get into the second one for sure. You mentioned that you were that one of the events that you just talked about. You mentioned that you were looking in your side view mirrors, and you mentioned before that you did pull your gun at a couple points in your career. And I think there was something that happened in Greece where
Right.
there was a guy on a motorcycle that followed you,
Yeah.
and that kind of prompted you doing those things. What's that story?
Yeah. This is one of these incidents that leads to PTSD. Um, when my family and I first arrived in Athens, the embassy put us up in an apartment because they hadn't yet gotten a house. I went sort of out of cycle. Most people go summer to summer, and I arrived a couple of months in. So they needed to go out and find a house. So we're in this apartment, and then they finally find us a house, and we're moving all our stuff up to the house. Uh, the embassy has a truck for most of our boxes, and then my wife was in a car, and I was in my armored car. And I had just bought a TV at the PX. It was a big one. It took up the whole back seat. Not big like we have today, but it was 25 years ago. So it was pretty big. It took up the whole seat. So I'm driving up the same Kifisias Avenue, and there's a motorcyclist, and he's trying really hard to stay in my blind spot. And I thought that's kind of odd. So I speed up and he speeds up. I slow down, he slows down. I move over a lane, he moves over a lane. My wife calls me. She's in the car ahead of me, and she says, "Do you see this guy?" And I said, "Yeah, I'm starting to get nervous." And she said, "You don't think it's 17 November?" And I said, "They can't possibly be on me yet." I said, I don't know what this guy's doing." And she said, "Are you nervous?" I said, "Yeah, nervous enough that I think I'm going to hit him. I'm going to try to hit him." And she said, "Okay." So I hung up and I sped up and he sped up, and then I slammed my brakes as hard as I could and I swerved right to hit him. And I barely missed him. So we did this a couple of times. And then there's this enormous intersection at the headquarters of the Greek, what's it called? The Hellenic Telecommunications Organizations, the AT&T of Greece. This is a major roads. So it's like 8 lanes, and it's all red lights, and it's all jammed up. So I've got to stop. I can't get away. I can't plow through, 8 cars in front of me. So I was like, okay, you're trained for this. So I pull my gun out. I put the car in park first. I pull the gun out. I get out and I said, "Titelis Ramalaka, what do you want, you son of a bitch?" And he goes like this. He smiles at me and he goes, "I'm not afraid of your gun." And I thought, oh my God, like that's not the response that you're trained to expect. So I thought, okay, I either have to kill him or get off the X, as they say. Well, just then, as I'm holding the gun on him, and these other cars are like, right? Everybody in all the other cars. So I've got the gun on him. The light turns green. Enough cars pull over. I get back in the car, put it in drive. I take off. He pulls out a gun. He gets one shot off. And it just barely nicks my bumper. Like just a mark on the bumper. So I get my phone, I call the embassy, security meets me there, the chief arrives at my house, my wife is there just before I am. We had private security at the embassy too, Wackenhut at the time, or however you say it in Dutch or Danish or whatever, Swedish, whatever it is. We always called it Wackenhut. So they put a 24-hour guard on my house. We went to the service. There was no license plate on the motorcycle. We went to the service. They couldn't help. We figured afterwards that this was a carjacking, that he saw the TV. He was going to follow me to wherever it was I was going to go, and he was going to take the car. We think that there was no plate on the motorcycle because it was probably stolen, which was quite common back then, and that it was just a crime of opportunity. I just was unlucky that day. Yeah.
So, how many people did you recruit while you were in Greece, if you can say?
I probably can't say.
Okay. Less than 5?
No.
Can you tell a story or two of recruitments? Maybe, you can whitewash the names and stuff, but
Sure.
something that stands out.
There was one. Working on 17 November, it had a very rich and deep history. And so I was going back through files, going back to the night that our station chief, Dick Welch, was assassinated in 1975, December 23rd, 1975. Dick and his wife had gone to the ambassador's Christmas party. And then they left the Christmas party, December 23rd. They drove back to the house in a close-in, very high-end suburb called Kiriakou. And those were the days before automatic gates. So their driver pulls up to the gate, and he puts the car in park, and he gets out to open the gate. When he did that, 2 people got out of a car parked across the street. 2 people remained in the car, a woman and a male driver. 2 other men got out. Both of them had guns. One was a .45 that has become known as the Welch .45. It was used in every hit that 17 November ever carried out, and a .38 revolver. And one of the men shouts, "Richard Welch, get out of the car." The driver runs for his life. Dick gets out with his wife. She gets out. She was very stoic and very strong, and our only witness. They've got the guns on him, and one of them says, "Richard Welch, you have been convicted of crimes against the Greek people, and you have been sentenced to death," and shoots him 3 times in the chest. They calmly get back in the car and drive away. So Mrs. Welch, of course, screams, runs inside, calls the embassy. It's chaos. Reading those old historic cables was so revelatory. The first cable was something called a flash. Flash means wake everybody up no matter what time of the night and call the director because he's going to need to brief the president. It's the highest. Well, there's one higher called a critic, but flash is almost as high as it goes. So the whole contents of the cable were Chief Welch shot and killed in front of home in Psychico. That was it. Headquarters writes back, it had to be the Russians. Had to be the Russians. But we always had an agreement with the Russians that we don't kill their people and they don't kill our people. And on their own volition, the Russians came to us the very next morning and said, we had nothing to do with it, and we'll help you in any way that we can. I'm going to make this long story very short to answer your question. There was a man walking his dog that night. He happened to be the defense attaché of an enemy country. And he saw the getaway car. But because he was from an enemy country, nobody ever bothered to talk to him.
Enemy to the U.S. or to Greece?
To the U.S. So I thought, I wonder if this guy's still alive. He'd probably be in his 80s by now. I'm going to look for him. So I sent cables out to everybody, right? Name traces, FBI, foreign governments. Anybody know this guy where I could find him? So I found him. And he was in his 80s, retired. So I sent a cable to the chief, our chief in that country. I said, hey, here's the story. Dick Welch. We're still working on the case all these years later, 25 years later. I'd like to come and talk to this guy. And he said, oh, look, we don't have any interest or any money to work on a 27-year-old case or 25-year-old case. We're not interested. I said, okay, how about if we pay for it and I'll just fly in and just see what I can find. He said, so long as you pay for it, you're welcome to come and do your thing. So I fly in. It was like snow past my knees. I remember trudging across this friggin' field. It's like 9 o'clock at night. It's dark. So I go and he's not there. It was his apartment, but his wife was there. And I don't speak their language, but I started to speak to her in Greek. And she's like, you speak Greek, she says in Greek, in very broken Greek. And I said, yes, do you still speak Greek? She said, I lived in Greece many years ago. I said, yes, I'm looking for your husband. I wanted to talk to him about Greece. And she said, oh, he's working. He's a security guard at a bank. He's like the night watchman at a bank. So she told me where I could find him. So I go to this bank. It's friggin' nighttime, right? And I'm banging on the door. And this 80-year-old man in an ill-fitting night watchman's uniform comes and answers the door. And he's like, yes. And I said his name. And he's like, yes. I said, I'm John Kiriakou from the CIA. And I'm here to change your life. That's what I said to him. And he smiles. And he says, my friend, I've waited 30 years for this day. And he says, please, come in. Yeah, that was my first recruitment.
Ever?
Ever.
Use your real name too?
Absolutely.
Why?
Because he was no threat to me. He's an 80-something-year-old man. When you can, you use your real name because you want them to trust you. And, maybe he's going to call the embassy tomorrow to make sure that I'm not KGB, Israeli, Mossad, Iranian, MOIS. Yeah.
Interesting.
He was a lovely old man. And he would always insist that we would have a drink. No. We'll talk about business after we have a drink. I'm like, okay. I'll tell you one funny thing that happened. He said to me, our next meeting, let's do it in my hometown. I said, okay, where's that? He said, it's about 2 hours east of here. It's in the mountains. It's very beautiful. There's a lodge, a very beautiful lodge. I would like to take you and have dinner. I would never let him pay for anything, but I said, great, let's do that. So I rent a car and I meet him out there at this lodge, and it was stunning, like out of a movie. At the top of this mountain, all you see is mountains all around. And the waitress comes up and she asked me what I would like to drink. And I said, I'll have an ouzo and orange juice. My grandmother used to drink them. You don't normally mix ouzo with orange juice. You mix it with water, or some people might mix it with Coke. I like the freshness of the taste. So ouzo and orange juice. And then they had wild boar, which I had never had before. So I had a wild boar steak. I still remember. Had such a great time. I said to him, let's do this again sometime. So a couple months pass, and he says, hey, you want to meet at the lodge again? I said, sure. So I rent a car, drive out there again, and the waitress comes and says, what do you have? And I said, how about an ouzo and orange juice? And she goes, I remember you. You're an American. You're the only person who's ever ordered that drink. And I was like, fuck, I can never come here again. I'll tell you a more appropriate story about cover and the necessity for maintaining cover. The most important event in the diplomatic year of any embassy is a presidential visit. Okay, when the president of the United States comes, you drop everything. And it doesn't make any difference if you're some high-flying CIA guy or the Department of Agriculture rep who sits in the basement. Everybody has to work. So we get this cable from the White House. Bill Clinton's coming. Everybody's got to have a job. So the ambassador signed me my job, and it was to take notes in the president's meeting with the leader of the opposition, who later became prime minister. That was a good assignment. Plus, I was an accomplished writer. I had 7 years in analysis, and now I've written 9 books. I write well. And the ambassador liked my writing style, so he gave me that assignment. So we're at the Intercontinental Hotel, and it's President Clinton, Secretary of State Albright, National Security Advisor Sandy Berger, the ambassador, and me, the leader of the opposition, his advisor who became Minister of Foreign Affairs, another advisor who became Minister of Defense, and their note taker. So it's 9 of us. So we have this whole, it's called the presidential suite at the top floor of the Intercon. And we have an entire table that's just full of food, just giant buffet of fruits and cold cuts and whatever. So I'm standing and the Greek note taker is standing. The president is sitting with the prime minister, or he became prime minister a couple months later. And then the aides are on either side. And the funny thing too, Clinton was just like the nicest guy in the world. He would have been a terrific case officer. So he says to the opposition leader, can I get you something to eat? We got all this food here, coffee, tea. He's like, no. The minister, no, nothing. He comes to me, he goes like this, would you like something to eat? And I go, oh, no, thank you, Mr. President, I'm fine. And he goes, oh, are you with me? I said, yes, sir, I'm with you. Sorry, I thought you were Greek. I said, I kind of am, but not really. I'm with you. So the meeting was not substantive. The meeting was, we love you. You love us. This is the birthplace of democracy. We're a democracy. So we love you, and you love us, and you buy our weapons, and we have lots of Greek people. And then they got up and they shook hands and they hugged, and that was the end of the meeting. And I'm like, how am I going to write that? But that's what I ended up writing. Nothing substantive. So we go out into the hall, and Clinton and Berger walk out first. The Greeks have departed. So Clinton and Berger walk out first. Then Albright and the ambassador walk out. And then I walk out. So my job is to keep my mouth shut and to stand there until somebody tells me what to do. So I'm standing against the wall, just standing like this. And Berger and Clinton finish their conversation. So Berger walks over to Albright and the ambassador. So Clinton's standing there, closer than I am to you. We were only 3 feet away from each other. And just as Berger walks away, the elevator at the end of the hall opens, and Hillary and Chelsea get off. And Hillary's got this puss on her face like this. So I'm looking at her, and she walks right up to us. And one thing about Bill Clinton, he hates silence. He's always got to be talking and joshing and joking and laughing. And she's just looking at him like this. And he says, boy, we sure had a good time at the Parthenon this morning, didn't we, Hill? She just stares at him. So he repeats himself. We sure had a good time at the Parthenon this morning, didn't we, Hill? And she says, Jesus Christ, Bill, it rained all day. I'll be in the room. And she walks past us. And I'm looking at him. And I know he could tell just from my eyes, like, you poor bastard. So he looks at me and he goes, let's get the fuck out of here. And he walks to the elevator. So I walk with him to the elevator, and then Berger, Albright, and the ambassador come, and the Secret Service, and we went to the basement, and he gave this big speech to the American Business Women's Association. Okay. A month later, my favorite agent triggers a meeting. He said, I need to see you. I said, okay. And he says, let's meet up at the Intercon. And I said, okay, I love the Intercon. They have a delicious Greek salad there. So we go to the Intercon, and this agent was always strictly business. I would always, no matter who the agent was, I would always say, what can I get you? Would you like some dinner? Would you like me to order a pot of coffee? What can I get from room service? Remember, my budget is unlimited. Whatever these guys want, whatever their hearts desire, I want to make the guy happy. So what can I get you? He's like, no. Actually, he said, I never get anything. Let's order a pot of coffee. I said, great, I could use a coffee. So I call room service, and I said, can I order a pot of coffee for 2, please? Guy says, sure. So I should add, I'm under alias in this meeting, which becomes important. So the room service guy comes up, knocks on the door. I open the door. Please come in. He said, you have a pot of coffee? I said, yes, thank you so much. And the agent is sitting there like this. He was always very relaxed, and he was a chain smoker. He would light one off the other. So he's smoking like this, like he owns the place. He was also like 30 years older than me, or 35. He's smoking. And the waiter says to me, have I met you? And I said, no. And the guy's smoking. He goes, yeah, I have. You were the note taker in Bill Clinton's meeting with the leader of the opposition. And I was like, and I said, right, you were the waiter. You catered the buffet. Excuse me. And he goes, right. He goes, but you live in Athens. Why are you in the hotel? And I was like, and the agent says, some nephew I have. I come all the way from Chicago. He makes me stay in a hotel. Smoking. And he's like, oh, well, welcome to Athens, he says to the agent, who's lived his entire life in Athens. And I said, good to see you again. He's like, yeah, good to see you. And he left. And the agent, as he's smoking, he goes, we can never meet in this hotel again. I said, clearly. And he goes, and you need to come up with a cover story. I was like, damn. Lesson learned, man.
What a fucking gangster, that guy.
Oh, he was hardcore. He was hardcore. He was one of these guys that, I'm glad I didn't know him when he was young, because he probably would have shot me. Yeah. Yeah.
Did you teach those guys tradecraft at all?
You have to.
Okay.
I'm glad you brought that up, because this same agent, I came to love this guy. And I said, listen, we're going to have to do some operational testing. So do you do a surveillance detection route? He goes, of course I am. What am I, retarded? He says. I said, no, listen, I know. You've been doing this for a long time, but you got to do surveillance detection. He said, I do surveillance detection. I said, okay, just so I know that you do. So I write to headquarters and I said, hey, can you send a team out? I just want to see if he's telling me the truth about doing the surveillance detection route. So they send this team out, which was a totally normal thing. These teams just go everywhere just to do this kind of thing. And at the end of it, they called me. I was waiting for him to come up to the hotel room, and they said he did a surveillance detection route that was so ridiculously good, we couldn't keep up with him because it would have blown our cover. I said, excellent. Excellent. So when he came in, I said, how'd things go? They call it the Mad Minute. Were you followed? Are you in fear for your safety? How much time do you have to meet? And we need to book our next meeting right now. You do that all in the first 60 seconds in case you're disrupted. So he's like, I said, were you followed? He goes, no, but I did a kick-ass surveillance detection route. And I said, good, good, good. See? Keeps you safe.
Wow. That's awesome. Can you say what he did to trigger the meeting?
I asked him if he had access to a target. And he said, not today, but I could fuck her if I wanted to. I said, get out of here. He goes, she's been flirting with me for 40 years. I said, well, she has something that I want. Can you get close enough to her to get it? And he said, yeah. I said, then get it. So he triggered the meeting to say he fucked her and she gave him everything that I had asked for and he wanted to give it to me. I said, you're a dog, you know that? You're like an animal. I said, you're an old man. You're older than my father, I told him. And you're banging women to get information from them? He's like, this is the life we've chosen for ourselves. I said, okay, all right. No need to get dramatic about it now.
I fucking love this guy. I love him.
I Googled him a few years ago and he died. He died about 10 years ago. I was sorry to see, but he was a genuinely good guy. Yeah.
So to that point, what is the role of sex in espionage?
Well, the written rule, and there's the written rule and the unwritten rule. The written rule is verboten. You never, ever sleep with an agent or with a target. The unwritten rule is when you sleep with the agent or the target, you have to report it to headquarters. And then they make a determination as to whether or not you can continue to sleep with them. We had one guy, when I was the deputy director's executive assistant, I had access to literally every cable in the world that the CIA was producing. So
Wow.
I was read into every compartment. And there was one of our guys out there, a young guy, good looking, go-getter. And he's like, I was targeting this woman and she has access to the prime minister's office and one thing led to the other. And so it's like, well, what do we do? So we said, are you into her? Or was it just one of these things where you had too much to drink? He goes, I'm into her and I think she's into me. And we were like, okay, you can continue to see her, but she's no longer a target. You're going to have to find somebody else. He ended up marrying her.
Wow.
Yeah. He had to resign. I mean, if you're going to marry a Brit or Australian or Canadian, okay, you got to report it. But most countries, you have to offer your resignation and then headquarters decides whether to accept the resignation or not. And that country she was from, they accepted the resignation.
That's so interesting to me about kind of the lines blurring in these situations, right?
Because you're a human.
Right. There's attraction.
Yeah.
But it goes back to the point about, is it a real relationship or is it a fake one?
Well, I'll tell you a funny story. When I was a brand new case officer with zero experience, I was assigned to work with this liaison officer who was the ugliest woman I had ever met in my life. It was like a joke. Like somebody took pieces of clay and as a joke, made this face. So I've just arrived. I just met her. And the chief says, well, she was really friendly to you in the meeting. I said, oh, yeah. I said, she mentioned she has an interest in American Expressionist art. And I actually know a little bit about American Expressionism. Child Hassam and, the early 20th, late 19th century American Expressionists. And he said, listen, I want you to fuck her. And I go, what? I go, you saw what she looks like? He goes, yeah, but, this would be a real feather in your cap. I want you to go ahead and fuck her. And I go, man, I'm married. And he goes, yeah, but It's for the country. And I go, oh, okay, I'll do it. I'll do it for the country. And he goes, no, you're not going to do it for the country. I'm kidding. We don't fuck them. And I go, well, how am I supposed to know? I've never done this before. He goes, I can't believe you were going to fuck her. Did you see her face? I was like, don't do that to me. I don't know any better yet.
Whatever it takes. That's awesome. Is there any other either recruitments or pitches that stand out from your time in Greece that you can share?
Yeah, there was one. So I was in a very dangerous country. Active Al-Qaeda presence, very dangerous. And we got word that a lot of Al-Qaeda fighters were congregating at this one coffee shop. So I let my beard grow out. And they used to call me the Archbishop in the embassy because it was like this. And while my hair was still dark, my beard was all gray. So I started going to this coffee shop and not saying anything to anybody. I would sit with an Arabic newspaper and just read. And these guys would come in clearly Al-Qaeda. Because if you're in this country and you speak in Arabic, yeah, you're Al-Qaeda. There's no reason for you to be in this country otherwise. So I never said a word, never made eye contact, nothing. But I'm there every single day, having a cup of coffee, reading an Arabic newspaper. Finally, one of these guys, as they're walking past my table to go to their table, one of these guys nods at me. So I nod back at him. And then a couple days later, they're coming in again, and he nods, and I said, Salam alaikum. And he says, Wa alaikum assalam. And he sits down. And then another week passes, and I said, Salam. He says, Wassalam. I said, Jismak, what is your name? Ana Mahmoud. I said, Ana Ahmed. أنت من وين? Where are you from? أنا من مصر. وأنت? I said, أنا في لبنان. I speak with a Lebanese accent because my instructor was Lebanese. Nice to meet you. He goes and sits. So now I know his name. So I can run a name trace, see exactly who this guy is. And he's a guy that we want to get to know. So one day he came in by himself, and I said, Tafadal, sit with me, please. So he sits, and he said, you live around here? I said, yeah, I live around the corner. You live around here? He said, yeah. I said, what are you doing in this country? You're Egyptian. He said, I came for jihad. I said, of course, of course. I said, I work for an NGO, orphans. We take care of orphans. Oh, good, good. Refugees. I said, yes, yes, it's a big problem. Yes, yes. I said, you came for jihad? He said, yes. And I said, you're not in Afghanistan. He said, no, I'm thinking it's time to go home. I've been there for 5 years now. I think I'd like to go home. And we would have these kinds of conversations. So it came time for the pitch. We have a security team set up, like completely surrounding us. So I said to him, yeah, Mahmoud, I'm not really who I said I was. I don't work for an NGO. I wasn't honest with you, and I want to apologize for that. And he's like, I said, I'm actually American. I said, and more than that, I work for the CIA. And he's like, I said, you're not running, screaming from the room? He said, I'm listening. I said, okay. What I want from you is A, B, C, D, and E. And I said, I will make you rich beyond your wildest dreams. He said, okay. I said, we can never meet here again. I said, I'm going to get us an apartment and we'll meet at the apartment. So we did. And then it came time for me to leave. So I turned him over to my replacement and I said, Mahmoud, I got to ask you, you were a true believer. Why did you agree to let me recruit you? And he said, because I was here for 5 years and you were the only person who ever asked me about my family. That was it. Yeah. They didn't care about him. He was just a body with a gun. They didn't care otherwise.
Damn. What about the one where you dressed up as a college kid?
Yeah, that was so much fun. Oh my God. That was the one that I enjoyed the most. Like I say, I was younger back then. My hair had no gray in it. I was thin. And we got word that the intelligence service station chief of an enemy country was coming for his new assignment. And how do you get to him? Right? I mean, he's not going to be at the cocktail party sipping a martini. So I had a mentor at the CIA by the name of Gus Avrakatis. Gus is famous. Charlie Wilson's War. I mean, books have been written about Gus. He was like a father figure to me. He was very controversial, inside and outside the agency. Killed a lot of Russians. A lot. Medals, promotions. Couldn't get along with anybody. Everybody hated Gus, and Gus hated everybody. But he was a sweetheart deep down. You just had to know how to deal with him. Like one time, we were working in the 17 November task force together, and I mentioned offhandedly that 17 November's second victim, the chief of the Hellenic National Police, his name was Malios, that Malios was a torturer during the junta. And Gus grabbed me by the lapels and slammed me up against the wall. And he goes, Malios was my friend. And I said, you better get your fucking hands off of me, old man, or I'm going to make you sorry. And he finally let me go. And I go, what the fuck's wrong with you? I said, Malios was a torturer. I'm sorry if he was your friend. I'm sorry he got shot in the head. But he was a torturer. And keep your hands to yourself next time. And afterwards, he's like, I really respect you for the way you reacted. So anyway, we were friends. So I called Gus and I said, Gus, I got a little pickle here. I said, the station chief is coming and we don't have a way to get to him. And how do you think I should play this? Because I want to cold pitch him, even if it just means frightening him so that he goes underground. So Gus said, let me tell you something I did back in the day in the 50s. So I wish I could take credit for this, but this was not my original idea, but it worked like a charm. So on Gus's suggestion, I got a book bag and filled it with books. So it was heavy and bulky. I found the guy's address, which was not hard. And I found his car, which had a diplomatic license plate on it. So I went up to the car and with my book bag, I broke off the side view mirror. And then I picked up the mirror, I went to the next door neighbor's house, a Greek lady, and I said, is that your car over there? I just broke the mirror off. No, she says it belongs to the guy next door. I don't know who he is. So I did that for cover reasons. So I go next door, knock on the door. The guy answers, and I start speaking to him in Greek. And I knew he didn't speak Greek. And so he says, in English, he says, no, I don't speak Greek. And I said, oh, I'm sorry. I said in English, I said, you speak English. I'm sorry. I was walking down the street and I've got my books here and I accidentally hit your mirror and I broke it off. And the lady next door told me that it was your car and I wanted to come and say I was sorry. Excuse me, sorry. And I want to pay for it. And he's like, ah, damn it. Now I have to take it into the shop. I said, I'm so sorry. It's totally my fault. I was just being clumsy. And I'm standing there at the door. He's inside, I'm outside. But in Arab culture, an Arab can never turn down a request for hospitality. So I said to him, may I trouble you for a glass of water? And he's like, wait here, he says. So he goes into the kitchen to get a glass of water. In the meantime, his little daughter, looked to be 4 years old, is playing on the floor. So I let myself in and I get on my knees and I say to her in Arabic, Shu Ismik, what is your name? And she says, oh, my name is whatever. And I said, how old are you? I'm 4. And I said, what are you playing? In Arabic, this is all in Arabic. So he comes back in and he's standing there listening to this, which of course I did on purpose. And he says to me, what exactly do you want? So I stood up and I said, listen, I'm not going to waste your time. You're a professional. I'm a professional. This is my card with my real name. I'm from the CIA in Washington. Your guy is going down. He's going to die. You can die with him, or you can be on the side of the good guys. And you have until 10 o'clock tomorrow morning to make that decision. And I walked out. And as I walked out, I said, I'll be sitting next to my phone. That's my direct line. So I went back. Everybody's like, how'd it go? I said, I don't know. We'll see. So we're all sitting there looking at our watches. The next morning, right at 10 o'clock, the phone rings. And he says, what do you propose? I said, meet me in the lobby of the Hilton Hotel in 2 hours. And come alone and come unarmed. So we had 6 security guys. We were at, CIA people were at every table around. There's a little cafe in the lobby. And I wanted it to be in as public a place as possible so that if, all hell were to break loose, I might have a little bit of safety in numbers, safety in the, public environment, cops walking around, security guards. So the guy made a demand. I made a counter offer. And finally I said to him, look, you're not in a position of strength to negotiate here. I'm telling you what it is that you're going to do. I'm not here to offer, riches. We can get to that conversation at some point in the future. But right now, you have to prove your bona fides to me. And this is what you're going to do. At the end of the day, he did literally everything that we wanted him to do. We did make him rich. He survived. He's a successful businessman now, thanks to your taxpayer dollars. And we were able to shut down any threat that embassy would have posed. And it would have posed a real threat to Americans.
Wow.
Yeah, that was a good one.
That's a ballsy pitch, man.
He was scared shitless. And like I say, he was a professional. So he knew that every one of these white guys that's sitting at every table around him is armed to the teeth and is working with me.
Yeah. It's like you said before when the guy on the motorcycle, when you put the gun in his face and he said, I'm not afraid of your gun. It's the same concept. You walk into his fucking house and start playing with his daughter.
Yeah.
He says, like, what kind of person is just going to walk in here and do that?
Like, this psychopath just came into my house and now knows my child.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's a good one, man. That is a good one.
I was proud of that one.
Yeah.
Yeah. I got promoted for that.
Promoted to?
GS 13 or 14. I don't remember anymore.
And that's like the interagency ranking system, right? Okay. What would that be the equivalent of in the military?
Lieutenant colonel.
Nice.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's a good one. So last thing on the Greece timeline, the second assassination attempt. This is right after you left Greece, right?
Yeah.
What's this story?
You know, out of all the things that I ever did at the agency, I think this is the one thing that I'm the most proud of. It wasn't the Abu Zubaydah operation. Although I was proud of Abu Zubaydah, I'm ashamed for our country as to what ended up happening after Abu Zubaydah, and we'll get into that in detail.
Yeah.
But the second assassination attempt, I was so proud of myself. Because by then, I was a seasoned case officer. I knew exactly what I was doing, and I was good at it.
How many years had you been working as a case officer at this time?
By then,
This is what, 2000?
2001.
So 2 years?
Yeah, 3 years. Doing high risk stuff. Like, I didn't become a case officer and then go to London or Rome, right? I went into the mouth of the beast with 17 November. So I get a cable from a buddy of mine who's the chief of a station in the Middle East. And he said, buddy, he goes, I got a case we're working on here. It's a double agent, and it's just too dangerous for me or for any of my people to handle. We need somebody who doesn't live here. You think you'd like to do it? I said, heck yeah. I was divorced. I had nothing to lose. Could use the overtime, you know? Was looking to buy a house. Why not? So I fly out there, and all these guys are my friends, right? We were all in training together or in Arabic together or whatever. We're all friends. So, in fact, this is the guy that introduced me to my second wife. Yeah. So I go, so what gives? And he says, well, we recruited this guy, and he works for an American defense contractor as an engineer. But he doesn't know that we know that he's actually a double agent for one of our greatest enemies in the world. I think they wouldn't let me say the country in the book. One of our most serious enemies in the world. So he thinks he's working for us. But we know that the bad guys have tasked him with identifying the station chief for an assassination. So he said, can you pretend to be me? I said, sure. I said, we're going to have to be really serious about security, but yeah, I can do this. So he said, remember, the guy has no idea that we know that he's a double. I had never worked a double agent case before. I had only learned about double agent cases in training. Like, oh, this is very rare, but in case this happens, here's what you do, and, all that. So he triggers a meeting, or the original handler triggers the meeting, and the guy comes, and I said, hi, my name's Nick. You wanted to meet the chief? You met him. Hi, nice to meet you, Nick. Am I going to be dealing with you from now on? I said, yes. We believe that you're important enough that I'll handle you directly. And he's like, okay, that's what I wanted. And I said, okay, well, in this introductory meeting, let's just go over the basic stuff. We'll go over security and surveillance detection, and a communications strategy. So I had what he didn't know was at the time called a tri-band cell phone. Cell phones were still very new. And this tri-band cell phone, it was a local number in that country, but it would ring no matter where I was in the world. Revolutionary idea at the time. You didn't have to put in 20 digits. It was just a local number. So he thought that I was there all the time. In fact, I'm in Washington. But if he needed me, the phone would ring. So I said, here's my number. So you have my direct number. Call me if you need anything. If you need to meet, you need to trigger a meeting, we'll come up with a plan. In the meantime, let's do this on such and such a date at such and such a hotel. And what I want you to do is plan out your surveillance detection routes. Make sure that they're very sophisticated. and I want you to go rent a post office box. So in the event of an emergency where we can't reach each other by phone, you can send a message to the post office box. I'll go retrieve it and I'll know where the next meeting should be held. Okay. So we shake hands. He shakes hands with the outgoing guy. Great. Now he's dealing with the station chief. Instead of doing a surveillance detection route, he drove directly to the enemy embassy. Directly. Now, if he had done a surveillance detection route, he may have seen that we had 4 cars with 8 officers on him. Never noticed a thing. Then they reported back to their capital, he's in with the chief. He did it. He's in with the chief. So we're able to track their communications. So I go back out a month later. He rented the post office box. Then I go back out a month after that, and he did this thing for me, and he did that thing for me, and we're establishing a rapport. So I do this for like 6 or 8 months. And then I get a call from my buddy who's the actual chief. And he said, listen, we're going to have to kill this operation. I said, what? Why? It's going well. He said, no, they just gave him orders to kill you in the next meeting. I said, come on, man. I said, he's afraid of his own shadow. He's not gonna kill me. And he said, we have to kill the operation. And I said, no rash decisions. Let's do a conference call. So I got all the headquarters muckety mucks together and the station guys. And I said, listen, let's do the next meeting at the Marriott, because every Marriott everywhere in the world is exactly the same. You come in the door and the bathroom is right there on your right. So we get 2 adjoining rooms that are connected by a door. I'll be in the bathroom, and when he knocks on the door, I'll say, come in. I'll have it propped open with the lock, the secure lock, you know how they do. He comes in, I grab him, you guys and liaison come in from the other room, and we get him. They're like, it's risky. I said, come on, guys, what do we do for a living here? This guy's a bona fide terrorist. He's ordered to kill me, then he's going to kill you, and he's going to kill you next, and he's going to kill you after that. We going to stop these guys or not? Okay, let's do it. So I get to the hotel, and I'm waiting. And I got to the hotel hours early, which was the plan. And we've got our guys in the lobby. And one of them calls me from the lobby, and he said, bad news. He goes, the bad guys are here in the lobby, and they've got at least 3 teams. I said, shit, I didn't expect that. The idea being, if he chickens out and doesn't shoot me, they're going to shoot me as I'm trying to escape. It's like, doggone it, we didn't consider that. We didn't think they'd have the guts to do it. We just thought that they wanted a degree of separation. I said, okay, so we can't use the front door, so we have to use the back door. And they're like, okay, he's coming in right now. And just as he's coming in, he calls me. And I never would tell him directly what room we're in. I would say, come up to the 4th floor or come up to the 5th floor. And then he would come up to the 5th floor and I'd say, I'm in room 211 or 815. Meet me in 5 minutes. And then I would take the elevator and he would take the stairs. So that way he didn't drag surveillance with him and then they try to kill me. So he calls me. He said, I'm here. I said, come up to the 8th floor. It was the top floor. Come up to the 8th floor. And he goes, okay. So he comes up to the 8th floor. And I go, walk with me over to the stairs. So we walk over to the stairs. And we go into the stairwell. And I said, let's go up to the roof. He's like, what? I said, let's go up to the roof. He goes, I don't think I want to go up to the roof. I said, yeah, come on, let's go. He said, I'm uncomfortable going up to the roof. And I said, why? You think I'm going to throw you off the roof? Come on, let's go. We'll talk up there. It's a nice day. He goes, I don't want to go to the roof. I said, get up on the fucking roof. He said, you're scaring me. I said, and you're pissing me off. Get up on the roof. I don't think I like this. I don't like it. I don't like it. I go, what's your problem? I thought we're friends. You told me last time you were my brother. What do you think I'm going to do to you up there? I don't want to go up there. I go, get up on the roof. So one step at a time, he gets up to the roof. I said, now stay here for 5 minutes and meet me in room 515. And I said, you worry me sometimes. So I go back down. 5 minutes later, he knocks on 515. I said, come in. He comes in. I come out of the bathroom. I tackle him. Our liaison partners and our security guys bust in from the side room. I have him pinned down. And he's like, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. And he says, I'll fucking kill you. And I said, motherfucker. I said, do you think I'm so stupid that I didn't know you came here to kill me tonight? Do you think I'm so unprofessional that I don't know that you're a double agent? I said, you're the stupid one. You're the stupid one because your life is over now. Over. Allahu Akbar, he kept saying. I said, yeah, keep telling yourself that. See how far that gets you. But remember, the bad guys are in the lobby. And they're looking at their watches. Like, where is he? We haven't heard anything. So the plan we had come up with was our liaison partners give him a shot of Demerol. And it knocks him out. Well, the truth is, people die in hotels every single day. So we put him on a gurney. We covered him up like a dead body. We took him out the back and put him in the ambulance. And we drove in an ambulance from the back door, the cargo, whatever, the garbage door, to their intelligence service headquarters. And when he came to, he was tied to a chair. So I said, now it's my turn, you fucking idiot. I said, your life is over. So now I'm going to ask you a question that's going to determine how the rest of your life is going to be spent. We know who you are. We know who you work for. And we know that you're in charge of the arms cache. So I want to know, where are the weapons? He's like, fuck you, I will never tell you, motherfucker. It's like, that's the wrong answer. He would never tell us. So we all huddled. They put him in a cell, and we all huddled together. And I said, listen, I have an idea. We know where he lives. And we know that he has a safe in the hotel. He had referenced the safe a couple times. I said, I wonder if the arms are in the safe. And they were like, okay, but how do we get into the hotel? Get into the house? I said, let's just break in. And they were like, no, can't do it. He's got a live-in Filipino maid. Can't do it. And I said, okay, let's declare an emergency, a gas leak. We'll say there's a gas leak. And then we'll evacuate the neighborhood. He lived in a cul-de-sac. So there were like 8 houses. And they were like, no, can't do it. We don't have underground gas lines here. We use propane. I said, oh my God. Okay, get a freaking 18-wheeler of propane. We'll spill the propane on the street, and then we'll declare an emergency. They're like, that we could do. So this 18-wheeler comes to the house. We're all at the house by then. There's this giant wheel, and I go like this with the giant wheel, and I spill all this propane on the ground. And then we call 115, which is their version of 911. And we said, oh, there's a big propane spill. We need the fire department. So the fire department comes, and they evacuate all the houses, and then we break into his house. And the safe is like this big. That was it. Like it's not big enough for anything. Like the safe in my bedroom is bigger than this. This is more like a strong box than a safe. So we had the locks and picks guy, and he cracks it, and all it has in it is a slip of paper. It was a map, like a kid's map, and it had an X. He had written this X on the map, and I go, "What are the chances that this is the weapons cache?" And they were like, "Well, this is all we have, so let's go for it." So we all got in these Jeeps, and we followed the map to a town that was about an hour south, and then past the town, we went out into the desert, and we're following the map, 100 paces and 50 paces and 30 paces, and there is an abandoned bunker with all the weapons. And it wasn't just weapons. It was mines and grenades and rocket launchers. And that group no longer exists. We put the entire group out of business that night. Yeah. And then years later, I ran into the chief. And I go, "Whatever happened to that guy?" And he said, "Oh, dude," he says, "life without parole means life without parole." Yep.
Oh, that's awesome. That's
I
awesome.
was so proud of that one. So proud. Because, so much of what we did at the CIA was just nonsense work. It was spinning your wheels, coming up with stupid ideas that would never work, wasting time and money on agents that could never be recruited, bad analysis, bad tradecraft, getting caught in surveillance. So when you get a victory every once in a while, it's good.
Yeah, it's a nice W.
Yeah.
So let's take a quick break, and then
Yeah.
when we come back, we'll get to 9/11.
Sounds good. 2 planes just hit both towers of the World Trade Center. I think we're under attack. I need $10 million, weapons, ammunition.
When he asked you to hold his hand, is there some sort of empathy in war that comes out that
That's
nobody
a
discusses?
great question.